so people who win like the lottery are like, wow, I've got $100 million and now I feel like crap, because they haven't actually changed their mindset. They're not making choices to change.
Some of that they don't have a choice about though. So it's not just that they're not doing the work psychologically to change themselves. It's that genetically 50% of what we bring to the table, we don't decide on.
Well, you all are in for a massive treat. I have Dr. Beck Ray, who is a writer, speaker, and clinical psychologist on this episode today. She is the author of Be Happy, 35 Powerful Habits for Personal Growth and Well-Being. She's also the author of Happi Habits, which is an e-program designed to boost well-being. This episode is all about this idea, the psychology, the research, the knowingness of what it means to be happy. We live in such a connected world, and yet we're incredibly lonely. We're afraid of feeling fear and pain, and oftentimes we think that we know what's going to make us happy, and we don't. We talk about all of that today. Is it okay to have a bad day? What is happiness? How do we unearth the courage to feel a bit more? This episode is amazing. I even started crying halfway through it because it was so powerful. I hope that you enjoy every single second.
So hi, Beck. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Mish. How are you?
Well, as I was saying before to you, I literally adore everything that you're bringing to the space of Instagram. And I found you through our mutual friend of ours, Amanda Vivier. And I pretty much stalked your Instagram and was like, can you please come on the podcast? Because I want to get to know you more. And your background loosely is in Clin Psych. You're on the Gold Coast here in Australia. Just tell us a bit about who you are and about this kind of Be Happy movement that you've started. And I have the book here in my hand because I love it. It's such an amazing book. And I really just want to talk to you about this idea of happiness and what it means for all of us.
Okay, there's a couple of caveats or clarifications that I want to make at the outset.
Yeah.
And it's around, let's start with the title of the book, okay?
Yeah.
Not my choice. That was my publisher's choice.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea that we can just be happy drives me insane, makes me want to stab myself in the eye, especially because that's a title on my book. But the premise is you have to sell books, right? They need to have catchy titles and they fit in a certain genre sitting on a shelf in a bookshop. So that's where the title came from. My approach to that title is let's get real.
Yeah.
And I think that in between the pages of that book, you'll see that I'm actually anything but the tagline, just be happy, you know?
Like the second page, you're like, let me just throw down some really important framework around what this means. And I want to talk about that in just a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of my presence online, I think people, I contributed it to. So my fault was I wrote a program called Happi Habits. I started online initially hiding. So I hid behind the brand Happi Habits and I did all the Instagram hacks and made Happi Habits a massive page and just used everyone else's material but my own. I should say I was just putting up posts with other people's quotes. I wasn't stealing material. Just to clarify that. But that was me not wanting to put myself out there. And then I kind of got sick of just repeating what everybody else repeats on Instagram. And I thought, I want to see if there's an audience out there for what I feel about life, which in summary, I guess, is that it's painful, but you can make it amazing if you bring bravery to it with a little bit of willingness to do the work and feel the pain. And so I started under my personal brand, and that's where all my people like you just came out of the woodwork, and I realized that that's the real space. So if we're talking about what I bring online, it's not happiness. It's this approach that in order for us to be able to really acknowledge what life is about, we have to acknowledge both sides of it.
I think I was just saying to you, when we take this podcast, it would be a couple weeks after some like high profile suicides by Kate Spade and Anthony Is it Bourdain? And
I think so, yeah.
people that have everything they'd ever want, everything they'd ever want at their fingertips and more. And yet they're still, I guess, what we would call unhappy or unbalanced or in the dark or whatever you want to label it as, right? But what I loved in the book, literally, I'm not even kidding you, it's like page after you say thank you to everyone and do that, like literally it's like introduction and then how to use the book. And then on page 8, it's Sonia, I don't even know how to say her last name.
Yeah, I don't either.
And she talks about this pie chart, which I mean, it's always good for us to understand, which is 50% of us, of our kind of our mindset is our life and our mental health is around genetics and personality. 10% and only 10% is possessions, money, fame, right? And 40% of it is actions and choices. Whereas I feel like in this world of kind of Instagram glossiness, we think it's actually like, maybe 10% mindset and choice and 40% what we can acquiesce. And we also, I see a lot of it in entrepreneurial life coaching, network marketing world of you'll be free, you'll have all this freedom, you'll have all this time, you'll have all this space. But if you don't know how to fill that with good choices and you don't know who you are, it actually can be quite damaging. How do you feel about this pie chart in today's society?
Well, I think one of my biggest concerns is just certainly how I grew up. So I don't think it's new. I think we just talk about it more thanks to the internet and social media. And that's that we're convinced that happiness is the default state, that we should actually feel happy all the time. And if we don't, then apparently there's something wrong with us, that we must be defective in some way. And we start to buy into this idea that everybody else has the secret but us. So we must be the ones that are, inadequate. We're the only ones that don't feel happy because everybody else is feeling happy. Just look at their Instagram profiles. And that's bullshit, because we know that social media is just highlight reels, but that's where we start to also continue to be convinced that happiness is external to us and can be purchased. And it just can't. Well, let me clarify. There are some things that you can do. There's always caveats.
Like footnote 1.
Let's go to the literature. There are some things that make a difference. One of those things is income. So I can't remember whether it's $70,000 per annum or $75,000.
I think it's about 75.
Yeah. So up to that amount of income, it will make a difference to your well-being. But beyond that, it doesn't.
It doesn't. And it's so interesting because you talk about in the book this Sonia lady that I can't pronounce her surname. I don't want to slaughter it on this podcast, but this hedonic effect. So people who win like the lottery are like, wow, I've got $100 million and now I feel like crap, because they haven't actually changed their mindset. They're not making choices to change how they think, who they are. They have no idea who they are. So they just default back into, and even almost entrench themselves worse than what they were before.
Some of that they don't have a choice about, though. So it's not just that they're not doing the work psychologically to change themselves. It's that genetically, 50% of what we bring to the table, we don't decide on. That's DNA.
Isn't that crazy? So I always think of like income and even business in general, like the more you make, the more you spend. You're like, oh, now I can have a VA. Now I can have a life coach. Now I can have a business coach. Now I can have my own office space. So it's kind of like you just get a bigger purse. So you just throw more crap into it. So that is really, really true. I think it's very good. Now, the other thing that I love that would love for you to talk about more is 4 things that we can control, which you outline in the book as you go into the book of Be Happy, which is choosing, cultivating, practicing, and making space. What do those, when we look at our pie chart, we basically have 40% of that we can throw those into, right? We have control over that. What do each of those mean to you?
Well, it's more a case of thinking about what you can do with your actions to be able to contribute to your well-being. So if we let go of the word happiness, because happiness is only, well, if we're talking about, the research on happiness, it's only a 1/5 of well-being. It's just it's a positive emotional state, and that's it. It's not everything else that can provide us with a sense of well-being. So those 4 tenets that I brought to the book were getting people to think about what can you do with your actions, the only things that we can control, to be able to add to your own well-being. So if you think of it like a garden, what are all the things that you can do to your garden to help it to flourish, even though you can't control the weather and even though you can't control the soil that you've been given, and you've just got to work with it?
I love that. I think especially in a world that is so noisy and so visual and so subliminal in a lot of ways, taking a step back and going, well, what can I control in this situation? Even if it's chaos, even if it's really shit, even if it's really exhausting or toxic. It's like, I'll just give you an example, right? Like, we're renovating our kitchen and our house is a mess. And I had a complete meltdown like 2 weeks ago in the shower. And I was like, I just can't do this anymore. Like, I just want a dishwasher and a sink, and I'm tired of washing dishes and laundry. Like, I just like had a complete, like, I just lost it. And then I said, well, what can you control?
Yeah.
You can't control moving the food into the pantry. And that has been a huge, massive game changer for me in my binge eating recovery, was understanding that even if 60% of it I couldn't control, I could control 40% of how I dealt with the 60%.
Yeah.
Was game changing for my addiction recovery. Game changing.
And I think that's where the power is learning what you can and can't control. We are socialized from a very young age. I haven't been to school lately, so I don't actually know what they're teaching, but I'll find that out when Bennett gets there, and I'll probably be very disappointed. But
yeah, you will. Yeah.
Yeah. But when I went to school, I certainly wasn't taught about emotions. And even though we have amazing movies like Inside Out, now where kids are exposed to feelings, I still think that as a society and as a culture, we are constantly thrust with messages that you shouldn't feel bad. And if you do something is wrong and you should take a pill to fix that, or you should go and do some kind of behavior to mask it. And so we end up with a culture of crime and divorce and addiction and all those types of behaviors that are basically just because we are experts at avoiding pain. So I'm not saying that those behaviors are, indicative that the person is defective in some way. I'm actually saying that they're indicative of the fact that human beings are experts at running away from their pain. And I don't think we're really taught that if you can learn how to have pain in a way that's manageable and in a way that doesn't damage you further, then what you can do in terms of expanding your life is endless.
What would you say then if somebody is venturing in through, it's something that I haven't been able to quite get the words out of, how do you go through the pain? I think it was just, there was something in me that was like, I'm just going to go into it because I had to. It was like, if I don't do this, I'm never going to get through my addiction. It'll just never happen. I'll just keep going back and back and back. I just can't it's still a bit too raw for me to try to, I kind of feel like I don't know how to teach you. I'm still learning. But if someone is like, okay, I want to let myself begin to feel, what are some of the things that you can give to someone when they start to kind of unmask the protection? Because, sorry, just as a little tangent, you talk about this really beautifully, and I want to come back to it in the cultivating of your inner life, where you talk about how we will do everything to avoid any sort of perceived threat.
Yeah.
So we'll smoke heroin, we'll shoot up heroin, we'll look at porn, we'll go shopping, we'll get married and married and married and married and married over and over again because we don't want to actually step into and feel what we need to feel. How do you begin to feel what you need to feel?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge. So one of the things I love most about this is, I don't know whether you've ever read anything by Glennon Doyle.
I've heard of that name though.
Yeah, so I love her writing. And in her book, Love Warrior, she said something along the lines of people who suffer with addictive behaviours or addiction on some level, and I think we're all addicted on some level, honestly. I do think we are. We all have our things.
Yeah.
But people who suffer, great damage to their life or their bodies or their minds because of their addiction are people who have been born with their nerve endings on the outside of their bodies. And I think to first just acknowledge that you feel life in an intense, sensitive way is part of acknowledging that you get this gift of being able to approach life in a far more deeper way than my father-in-law, who does not feel things in a deep way, and who is happy as long as he's got his football and has his lawn, and will talk to me about the crack in the concrete, because that's as deep. I'm serious. Like, he's once stood outside my house and stared at my concrete for 5 minutes and then come back in and told me that there was a crack there, and was I concerned about it. So some people are born with this level of lightness about them where they don't necessarily go deeply. Now, I'm not attacking my father-in-law, because life is easy for him. He has a beautiful experience of life because it only goes to a certain level. But for those of us with our nerve endings on the outside of our body, I see it as a gift. Like, you actually get to see the color of life that other people don't get to see. But with that comes the pain. You can't have one without the other, right?
It's like making me teary. Like, I'm like choking back tears, because I've never, well, sorry.
That's okay.
I've just never seen my addiction that way before.
Yeah. And that's how I see it. Like, I think we need to acknowledge the beginnings, to go back, and rather than just look at the behavior and go, how do we fix it? Because people go, Rebecca, tell me the answer, You're a psychologist, you should know. Bullshit, right? Okay. I just happen to have done 8 years of study, meant nothing in living life, right? This is how I see it. If you think, well, as a person, I need to acknowledge that my experience of life is the full spectrum of emotion. That is a gift. Yeah. It means that what you can bring to connection, what you can bring to your voice, and what you can bring to your experience of life and other people's experience of life can't really be bottled, but it's not something that everybody has. So acknowledgement is number one. Just acknowledge who you are as a human being. The second thing is to then, when we think about moving into pain, it's such an overwhelming thing that anyone would run. That's why we do what we do, right? That's why we go, no, I will not be having that, thanks. Oh, let me take an opiate, or let me go and spend $1,000 tonight online shopping, because that just makes me feel better for 5 minutes, and then I'll have to follow it up with a glass of wine, because that feeling doesn't last very long. So everybody gets overwhelmed with the depth of their emotion. So from there, I would say, well, then don't make the steps so big. Like, some people, go cold turkey and that works for them. But some people need to take tiny steps to go, actually, I felt a bit of emotion today and that was okay.
Totally.
We need to sometimes relearn how to feel, particularly if you've had addiction. If you get to the point where you're so used to numbing, then the idea of feeling anything other than the outcome of your addictive behaviors is really scary. And, some of the most scary feelings are joy and contentment. Mm-hmm. The feelings that we seek most, peaceful feelings, they're often the scariest because they make us feel the most vulnerable.
Totally. I remember I work with a Clinical Psych when I first had my, I went to the GP, which was always interesting because they're like, all right, 5 minutes, see you later, put it on, he's like, get out of here. Here's your referral, see you later. But I just remember that being so pivotal in my recovery, was just learning to feel, because I hadn't felt for so long. And part of my recovery too has been, I've intentionally not cut out like gluten and dairy, even though I know that I need to, and it causes stomach upsets. And I'm still eating shitty food, and because if I don't allow myself to heal those little dendrites that are still out there, getting zapped, sometimes I need to just be slowly, gently. I've never, ever been able to conceptualize why I've had to go so slow with some things, because it was almost like if I didn't have bread, for example, which I know sounds so stupid, but I know if I didn't have bread, I felt like I had no way to cope. And so it was like this little, just like you said, just a little bit, just a little bit, just a little bit. When you felt like binge eating, instead of binge eating, I would tell my husband. It was just this slow unwinding. That's why addiction is so difficult to overcome, because it's like every day, because we have those little tentacles out there, because we feel differently, we feel more intensely. It's a constant awareness that, are we okay with that feeling? But I love what you said about acknowledging it, because so many people are so terrified to say, my marriage is really shit, or I hate my job, or everything I thought that I wanted, I don't want anymore.
Yeah.
That's so powerful.
And we're often too scared to say it to the people that count. So that's when we're most vulnerable, right? Like you said that you can tell your husband when all of a sudden you have a wave of needing to act on those feelings to numb them out. But sometimes telling the people closest to us is the most vulnerable thing that we can do, you know, to step in that space to go, I'm not okay. And so I guess there's two things, and I have to talk about the second thing before I continue, which is really tangential, sorry, but it won't make sense if I continue. The other thing is that I don't know that we can heal without support in some way. And so I often talk about how there are times on the path where you need to go it alone, and there are times on the path where you need to have someone to hold your hand. And I really think that we need to see any kind of healing as a two-way street, with people along the path sometimes and without them sometimes. It's not just, well, I don't need anyone, or, well, I need a lot of people around me. It's that at some point along the way, it will be both for you. You know, you'll have to have time alone, you'll have to have support.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and then it's about understanding that sometimes the people that need to support you need you to be vulnerable, to know where you're at, to be able to meet your needs. And yet if you can't get vulnerable to tell them that, then you end up in this cycle, and it can be quite damaging for relationships. So I know it's actually much easier for me to talk to strangers about pain than it is for me to sit down and talk to my wife.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of work for me to not be the capable one.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you said in your book, you're like, if you're nodding right now because you're a control freak, I'm nodding with you because I'm a control freak as well. And I was like, at least she's self-aware of her control freakness. That's so
Absolutely. I have a type A personality. I'm a total control freak. And I kind of suck at getting vulnerable when it counts. So I can get vulnerable and I can stand on a stage and tell you about my pain to teach you a certain concept. Yes. But to sit down when I'm in pain, because I only do that once the pain's over, you know, and I'm like, yeah, let's reflect on this pain. Like, this is what I do, right? Let's reflect on pain. I can smash that. But when I'm in the pain, to be able to sit in that space and go, I'm not doing well today, that is actually very difficult and requires me to get into a space of vulnerability that's very uncomfortable for me. It takes a lot of courage. And so what I would say to someone that's moving into their pain is to understand that there will be sticking points for you like that. That might not be your thing, but you will come across some sticking points where you have to level up. And that's where I go, you know, go gently, because it's not linear.
No, it's not. And it's like, and I've also said often, repeatedly, is that my stuff isn't just my stuff. I feel like it's generations in my family, or just generations of women in general.
Yep.
I have never looked at my addiction as a gift. That's so interesting. Like, I feel I'm kind of like, I'm like processing while I'm processing. I'm like, what if we start to look at our pain or our story as a gift, as opposed to, oh, you know, like, why can't my life be perfect? Or why is my marriage hard? Or why is my husband addicted to porn? Or like all this type of stuff. It's like, well, that person, what if there's a gift underneath of all of that? What if there's a story, a healing journey? But it does take a lot of courage and vulnerability. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that before I just ask you something else?
No, you can go on.
I love that conversation. I think that is one of the best, most beautiful, life-giving, life-breathing things I've ever heard about empaths or highly sensitive people or people who have addictions. I think that there's such a negative connotation around addiction, like, just stop doing it. Why doesn't he just stop doing it? You know, why don't you just stop eating? It's like, you know, this is so much bigger. And when we start to see our feeling as a gift, that's really powerful.
Yeah. I think if you understand how deep you can feel, then if you think of the universe and think of the fact that there's multiple universes out there and just the level of expansion there. If you imagine that your own feelings are a universe in themselves, some people have a very small universe.
Like cement and footy.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people have a very large universe. And if you have to navigate that universe, then of course you're going to stumble. You know, that's going to be tough because there's a lot of space to cover. Some people only have a small amount of space to cover, and therefore it's an easier ride for them. So I would see the feeling side of it, your own humanity of it, as the gift. And sometimes what comes out of that because of the scariness is addiction. And like I said, we all have our things, right? We all have our Band-Aids.
I love this conversation. I love it. I love it. So speaking of which, when we have, sometimes crappy days or, we're both you and I are entrepreneurs, there's days when it's like you're flying, you're in flow. You talk about flow being a really clear focus, which I agree with. It's a focus of what you really love and you're very in flow and what you're very centered. And then there's days when it's like you are just thrown out of the raft and you are not in flow at all. And that's when what I love that you talk about is your inner life, as opposed to, we hear a lot about kind of buzzwords around inner critic and like making peace with your inner critic. And I would just love for you to explain, what does inner life mean to you in a larger sense, which is in the book, but I want to talk about it. Why do we run away from, we kind of talked about that before, but our inner critic likes to just jump in and save us. I put that in quotations. And how do you work with your inner world, your inner life?
Well, I can't think of inner life as just an inner critic because there's so many facets to our inner life. So I see our inner life as your emotional world, your physical world. So your body often has a mind of its own, we can't control what our bodies do on a day-to-day basis. We can help them or hinder them, but we can't necessarily control it. And then there's also obviously the thoughts that occur internally. Then there's reflection, then there's memories, then there's, all sorts of facets of each of those things that show up. And so my approach to that is to observe all of it and approach it as something that is part of your broader experience, but it's not your identity. And when we talked about inner critic specifically, my approach around the inner critic is to not give it the power of having an identity where you then have to change that or engage with it to try to bring it around to see your perspective. Because I promise you that won't work, right? If you start to argue with your inner critic, then you have just done it the biggest favor, and you'll end up in a space where your inner critic will rave on for as long as it possibly can to win the argument, and it always will win. So rather than thinking that you've got to turn your inner critic positive, because then we're into an Instagram mantra of just think positive, like what bullshit. Like there is not something that's more ridiculous than that. And so,
I adore you. Every time I see that, I'm like, wow, I'm having a shitty day. I can't be positive right now.
That's right. Just think positive. Let me slap you in the face. Like it's so invalidating. So instead, I would observe the inner critic as just something that's louder from day to day, depending on what kind of day you're having. And instead, your choice is how much energy, how much time, and how much emotional investment you actually give the noise it's making. You might not be able to turn the noise off, but you can choose what you do in response to the noise.
What are some strategies then if someone has like that volume is just cranked high? What are some immediate things that you've given your clients in the past to what you talk about in the book is choosing to detach from the negative facts as logic? So what are some quick, remove the tentacle off of that conversation with your inner critic?
It depends how many tentacles there are. So it does.
Yeah.
Or how loud the volume is. So if it's cranked max high, like if we're talking 100 out of 100, your inner critic is screaming at you, then I wouldn't say it's about anything that you do. And instead I would say go and get your person and tell your person what's happening and get your person to speak back to you, because often you need an external voice to bring back some logic and rationality.
Yes.
So I have two best friends. One of them is a psychiatrist and the other is a psychologist. So I am sorted. Not that they stare at me, but they're amazing in being able to go, whoa, let's just, here's a different perspective on that. And when the volume is that high, that's what I would encourage you to do. Don't try to do it yourself. My goodness, our minds are so strong for a reason. And if it was that easy to overcome your mind, we wouldn't have addictions. I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah, you wouldn't have a job. That's exactly right. Nobody would follow you on Instagram.
They wouldn't. They'd be like, oh, I had that sorted years ago, girlfriends. I don't need a post on it. But then what you want to do is, if it's not that high, so let's go, we've wind back now and it's maybe only 75% loud, then what you can do is think about your thoughts as just being thoughts. So they're just noise, the sounds of words and letters put together in your head. Then you have a choice as to what you do in response to them. So if I have a thought like, my website's currently just screwed. Well, one part of it is, and I can't figure out how to do this thing without paying a web developer money that I don't want to spend. So, we're into day 6 of this problem, and it's doing my head in because I don't love IT stuff. But the thought is, I just won't sell online, right? So my mind goes, it's too hard. I'm quite a black and white person when I'm in my stuff. And so my mind just goes, well, that's it. I'll just shut the shop on the site like that. They just can't buy my book from me. There's no signed copies. There's no such a thing, right? And then, because that's how I roll in my head. It's lovely. It's lovely. It's nice to be me. You don't want to be there all the time like that. But when we're responding to that, if I just go, that's interesting. Thanks, mind. Thanks for doing your job. Because our mind's problem solve. That's their job. So my mind is trying to get rid of the pain by saying, don't sell online. If you just stop, if you take away the shop page of your website, then we don't have this pain anymore. So my mind is actually trying to do me a favor. And if I just approach it by going, that's an interesting solution, thanks very much, mind, but I don't need to, engage in that right now, then all of a sudden I have some energy left over to actually solve the problem more methodically, more logically, that kind of thing.
Our minds are insane.
Yeah, they are.
Like insane as in I can't, once you start to understand, is it neuropsych, neurobehavior, it's just insane what our brains are capable of doing, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about acknowledging it. It goes back to what you said earlier. It's if I'm in a place where I can feel the triggers, because I feel like as an addict, I will always have triggers. They'll be often, if it's not food, because I've had weight loss surgery, then it will be sometimes alcohol. So I don't even drink that much. Or it could be let's just go buy something. It's the same kind of serotonin, dopamine rodeo that's seeking escapism. But sometimes if I'm okay, what is this really about? And I can go through it. And that can be scary sometimes. And it's usually so fast. I'm really worried about this person. I say it to my husband and then we move on. It has been really powerful. Another thing that's been very powerful for me is meditation. Mm-hmm. And I resisted it I resisted it for so long because of what you said earlier, which was I actually almost liked being a victim. I couldn't understand that I could actually get out of this. I almost started to play that game, which is the game that your mind plays because it's comfortable. It's, you know yourself as an addict. So it's easier to be that than could I possibly be something else? What does that mean? What do I look like? Who am I then?
Yeah.
But meditation, and very slowly, again, I had to only do it in 3 to 5 minute chunks because that's all I could manage, has been a huge game changer for me. What are the other things that you, I guess, in your repertoire, your toolbox as a psych to help calm the mind? Meditation, exercise?
Definitely exercise, but that does a whole series of things that are not just mind-based. So exercise has so many benefits in terms of its antidepressant effects, its anti-anxiety effects, because of how it changes our body and how we respond so well to an endorphin shot, essentially, injection. But one of the most powerful things is to actually just speak the emotion out loud and give it a name. So if you don't want to put aside 3 minutes or 5 minutes for meditation or half an hour, and you are in the moment, let's say you're stuck at work, you can't just go jump on a treadmill.
No.
You can't, you can't just sit and meditate, or maybe you can, nobody knows that you're doing it. But, if your work is constantly engaging, you can't just go and do a strategy that's going to take time out of your day. And one of the things that I think that we need to acknowledge is that those triggers often turn up when we are unconsciously just sitting there and doing everything automatically and we're not aware of our feelings at the time. Then they show up and then you have to act on them. So you're not always in a state where you can do what I would consider proactive strategies. So proactive strategies are things like exercise and meditation that you might do whether you're feeling good or not. They're not just reactive based on when you feel bad. So when you're not feeling crash hot, my other approach to that is if it's going to take time, it's not going to work. I could sell people on all sorts of strategies that might have a great outcome, but if they need half an hour to do it, they'll just look at me like I've grown a second head.
Yeah.
And so one of the simplest things that you can do is go, right now I'm feeling anxious. It's to take a feeling, to take it out of your body and actually say out loud, this is what this thing's called. It seems to drop the power out of it very quickly.
I love that. I have found so much power in that as well. It's kind of like it's that you're releasing the pressure off the pressure.
Yes, absolutely.
It's still cooking and it's still there, but you're not under any pressure. One last thing I wanted to ask you about, because I was reading your book about gratitude. When you talk about how gratitude is one of the most powerful tools that you can use to change your mood, basically, your mindset. It says, when asked to name the most life-altering tool for ongoing happiness, it would be choosing to focus on gratitude.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because being a baby of Western society like I am, I've grown up in a first world country that is very cultured in all our Western ways and looking external to fix pain. I have also grown up with the media's messages that I'm not enough, and because I don't look like Kim Kardashian, and because I don't have I'm not a millionaire, and I don't have all these other external things that are advertised to me daily on Facebook about how apparently I will be enough if I had those things. If you come back to gratitude, it completely reverses that mindset of what's not available to what is available, from what's not enough to what is enough and what you already have. And so despite the fact that I deal with this stuff all day, like I'm writing about it, I'm engaging about it online, and I'm a psychologist, so I'm trained in it. The other thing is I'm also a human being, so I'm not immune to getting affected by those messages. But I've just found that to come back in the moment, and I don't keep a gratitude journal. It's one of the strategies that is promoted because it's science-backed. I basically just do it in my head to come back and go, well, what do I have,
I love the gratitude jar. It was actually, again, gratitude means that you're courageous, you're vulnerable, you can feel joy, which is really can be very difficult for people to be kind of like, I'm not grateful for anything. There's nothing good about this situation. So I felt that with one of my clients. And so I said, well, why don't you do something with your children? So they got a gratitude box. And so it was an easy way for them to kind of titrate themselves. Again, those little nerve endings, feeling joy, feeling peace, calm, courage.
Yeah.
I felt that was really good. And I actually wear a necklace that has grateful on it. It's not anything for me, but gratitude has been one of the hardest things for me to implement in my life because, again, I am quite critical. I can be quite critical. And also it means that you can't be a victim when you're in gratitude.
You can't, exactly. And you then take your agency back to, well, I have a choice then sitting in this. If I've just said all the things that I'm grateful to have, then I have a choice to go back into victim mode and whinge about what I don't have or what I'm not, or I can just continue on going, this is what it is. Because I think if we fail to acknowledge who we are inherently and allow that to play out, but also to work with it, to manage it, then you end up fighting against it the whole time. And like I said earlier, I'm a control freak. I have a type A personality. I'm easy to worry. I'm quick to become anxious if things aren't within my control. If I don't acknowledge that is largely genetics, did not get the nicest genetics, thanks mum and dad. But in terms of that approach to life, that's just who I am. But if I constantly rubbed up against that and sat and lamented, why aren't I different? Why can't I be like my wife, who's the most beautiful compliment to me in terms of she's far more laid back, thank goodness. Thank goodness for our son. But in terms of being able to approach it, one of my approaches is about that gratitude of, well, because I do feel things strongly and I do have that approach, it means not only am I great at planning and details or that kind of stuff, but also I have this depth that I can draw on to go, hey, my world is this big internally, it's amazing. It's got so much color because I feel like that.
Yeah, I love that. That is life-changing for me. And I hope that for the listeners that is life-changing for them too, because there's so much pressure online. As again, an entrepreneur, it doesn't even matter, entrepreneur, mom, every world to be what somebody else is, but you don't know what their emotional universe is like. You don't know what your emotional universe is like. So to expect yourself to be like someone else, follow that path that someone else has told you to follow, is actually quite damaging.
Yeah.
because we're not honoring each person's sphere of emotional acknowledgement, resources, etc. God, I love that.
It's the same as what Amanda talks about. So Amanda often talks about seasons as well. You don't know what season another person is in.
No,
so they may have been in a really great space when you last saw them or when you last heard from them, and their season might have changed. And so I think we always need to come at people kinder than we need to be, because you don't know what's happening behind closed doors. And yet I also say that as a human being that's well aware that we're always far more focused on ourselves than other people. It's a process. We just practice. You know?
We're just practicing all the time. Okay.
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever, because I was like, we'll ask for all these other questions that will be on forever. So where can we, so you've got the Be Happy book, which is so funny that you didn't want that title. But it's true though. It's beautiful. I love it. It's such I was actually flicking through the pages and I was like, I love the way the pages feel. I love the colors. It's a beautiful book that you could honestly give to anyone.
Thank you.
Regardless of whether it's beautiful. I love the texture on the outside. I'm really texture. I don't know if you're.
They did a great job with the design.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So where can we get your book? Obviously not in your shop.
Not online right now. Don't talk to me.
How funny is that?
I'm trying to have a good day. Don't talk to me about that. No, I'm just joking.
I think I got mine on Book Depository.
Yeah, so you can get it online. So any major bookseller, and you can get it from, I don't know which bookshops exactly. I know DMX has it, and I know that I think Big W has it, but I'm not sure which states in Australia either. So, but it is available readily at the moment. So
yeah, so it's called Be Happy by Dr. Rebecca Ray.
Yeah,
Ray's Bay.
Okay.
Ray. Good word. 35 powerful methods for personal growth and well-being, and we can find you on Instagram.
Yep, Instagram at Dr. Rebecca Ray, and Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter at Dr. Rebecca Ray.
So basically, we can just stalk you on all social media platforms.
You can.
You are a treasure. And
Thanks,
you are a voice that we need right now in this world. And I'm so grateful that you have taken the risk to go from the Happi Habits program and are creating your own content, because it's so good.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Mish. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today. If you'd like more information about myself, my journey, my public speaking engagements, or life coaching with me, please head to my website, mishpope.com. If you can kindly leave me a beautiful review on iTunes, I would be forever grateful. I can't wait to connect again in the next episode.